How can your company better manage supply chain risk? That's the subject of today's interview. Hey everyone, I'm Diann Daniel from TechTarget, and I'm here with Eric Kimberling. Eric is the CEO and founder of Third Stage Consulting, an independent consulting firm that helps their clients better manage digital transformation. We're talking about supply chain risk and ways to better manage it. As a next step, read the associated article. So there's just so much going on. Any thoughts on ways to prioritize and tackle these things when maybe you can't do all of them?
Generally, when you do that analysis or that risk analysis of your supply chain, you find a laundry list of stuff that you could be changing or improving. And certainly you're not going to do it all overnight, to your point. So it's important to prioritize that. But one thing I'd say just as a start is it's important to rethink what your prioritization criteria are, because in the past, up until 2020, I would say most supply chains and supply chain managers were focused on, how do we optimize cost and how do we optimize throughput, which is sort of your traditional way of thinking about supply chains. But now you have to add another layer of complexity, which is, well, what about the long-term sustainability and the overall flexibility of the supply chain? So in other words, how do we adapt quickly if something happens, if there's a disruption in the supply chain? And more importantly, how do we might have to make decisions now that say, well, we might have to look at higher costs in the name of having more predictable risk mitigation efforts in place. So I bring all this up because I think it's in the past, you would just say, well, let's look at, where the biggest cost savings could be if we were to adapt or adjust something within our supply chain. But now mindsets have shifted where cost is still important, but now you have to look at the overall reliability of the supply chain. And so I think it's a matter of defining what your key prioritization criteria are and identifying based on those criteria where are the biggest risks and where's the biggest potential impact based on those specific criteria that you're struggling with as an organization, or strategically you might want to prioritize in that way.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. On a different note, or I suppose a related note, what tools are you seeing?
You certainly have your traditional tools like your back office ERP systems and your supply chain management and warehouse management technologies that are meant to automate and provide visibility and data to help you just understand the supply chain and where the strengths and weaknesses are and how you're performing from a supply chain management perspective. And those technologies are still important. Companies are still getting advantages from them. But what we found is that traditional back office ERP and supply chain management systems aren't necessarily cut out for what organizations need today. I used the example before of geopolitical risk. If I'm a US company and I have a lot of concentration of suppliers in China, for example, given the geopolitical tension between the US and China, you start to wonder, is that a good thing? I mean, do I need to diversify? Do I need to hedge that risk of some sort of trade war between the US and China? And that's the way, traditional ERP and supply chain management systems haven't really provided you the information or the focus to be able to do that. So there's tools out there now that provide additional, I call it augmentation to traditional ERP and supply chain management systems that help you identify some of those patterns or potential risks. You also have the use of artificial intelligence in a lot of the newer, more emerging supply chain tools that will help identify and predictively assess where there might be potential problems, or where there's too heavy of a concentration of risk, or where there's some sort of geopolitical issue that might be affecting a subset of your supply chain. So it's all that kind of stuff. There's different tools out there that you really need to think outside the box of your traditional ERP and supply chain types of systems.